Today we're going to be delving into one of the most controversial and at times beloved figures on the Formula One paddock. Not only was he the youngest team principal in Formula One history, he has also gone on to be the second most successful in the entire history of Formula One. With 14 world championships between constructors and drivers and 124 Grand Prix wins, this is the story of the man who ended his career in a controversial note and started it as a racing driver, at one point being a driver owner of his own team in Formula 3000. This is, of course, the story of Christian Horner. This is Car Heroes. I'm Jason Hassett, and welcome to Current and Combustion.
You didn't listen. Can you repeat the question?
Hello everybody and welcome to Car Heroes, the second episode. And this one we're going to stick very much in the Red Bull family, like we did for the inaugural episode where he covered my favourite driver of all time, Sebastian Vettel. But this one is a little bit of a more controversial figure and one who has recently signed his P45, although for him signing his P45 is a lot more lucrative than for a lot of us. It is, of course, Christian Horner. And let's get rid of the faff and just ask you to subscribe before we get the finger out and jump into the life of Christian Horner, starting at his very birth, right up to his firing from Red Bull. So I've got my notes here, and as always in Car Heroes as well as Story Time, these notes are all research done from the interwebs, which is notoriously wrong a lot of the time. So if there's something that you think I've gotten wrong, or there's a fun fact you think I've missed out, please do let me know in the comments. And otherwise, just sit back, relax, and enjoy this journey through history with me as we talk about Horny Horndog Horner. Christian Edward Johnson Horner was born November 16th, 1973 in Leamington Spa in England into a family with automotive industry ties. For example, his grandfather was a Standard Motor Company manager, which was a motor company back then. And his grandfather also ran a automotive supply firm with his son, Christian's father, later down the road. He grew up with two brothers and attended Arnold Lodge School and then Warwick School in Warwickshire, and developed an early passion for motorsport, competing in local karting events and so on as a boy. Jumping forward to Horner's late teenage years, though, in 1991, Horner's racing career began in earnest after he won a Formula Renault scholarship in 1991. He progressed through the junior formulas in the early 90s, and in 1992, he raced in Formula Renault, the British series, so Formula British Renault, I believe it's called, taking a race win and top rookie honours. So off to a relatively decent start. He then moved all the way up to British Formula 3 by 1993 and competed in F3 and British Formula 2 all the way through to 1996. Doing well, climbing the normal ladder that F1 drivers do. But despite modest success over this kind of 5 to 6 year period in racing, he became kind of very aware, and it became very obvious that he was never going to be a top driver. And Christian seemed from an early age to be the type who was very much all or nothing. And if he wasn't going to make it to Formula One, that wasn't going to be enough for him to just go into other racing series and be kind of a mid-tier racing driver. So he just wasn't up for that. So in 1997, at the age of 23, Horner graduated to Formula 3000, which I believe is Formula 2, right? So I think so. I think that's what became Formula 2. I may be wrong there. But he found the competition just extremely tough, especially because this is where all of the future Formula 1 stars would basically fit, that and Formula 3. During a test in 1998, following Colombian prodigy Juan Pablo Montoya, who we will definitely cover in this series on track, Horner experiences an epiphany that he was not capable of replicating the raw speed and commitment of these elite drivers. Look, I know that Juan Pablo Montoya, for maybe a lot of younger fans, the fans that were brought in droves by Drive to Survive, which I'm not saying in a derogatory way, I know a lot of Twitter does, or brought in by just a variety of things over the years, may not realize how good Montoya was, given his racing record. His stats aren't up there with some of the very best, but But do not underestimate, and like I said, we'll cover him, how brilliant of a driver Montoya was. But he made a bold decision because of this, at the age of just 25, to retire from racing and focus on team management completely, something which a lot of other drivers wouldn't do. So fair play to him for that one, let's be honest here. So in 1997, Horner channels his ambitions into running his own racing team. With help from his father and others, he co-founds a company called Arden International, which is going to compete in Formula 3000. He gives future Formula One games an incredible idea by starting as a driver owner from 1997 to 1998. But after stepping back from the cockpit, Horner becomes a full-time team principal of Arden, and he shows entrepreneurial savvy. In 1999, he signs drivers Victor Maslov and Mark Grossens, and even brings in investors like David Richards from ProDrive, as well as Russian backers via Lukoil. He kicks off all of this, showing his entrepreneurial might, and the young Brit becomes an almost overnight successful Formula 3000 team owner. Horner later buys back ProDrive stakes and takes over full control, which is a bit of a foreshadow to later in this story. And he's determined to build Arden into a winning force in Formula 3000. At this time as well, Horner begins a personal relationship with a lady named Beverly Allen, a relationship which will continue on until 2013, but we'll get more into that later. Horner's racing team hits home hard and fast, and by 2002, they win their first constructors' title in Formula 3000 and almost win the first driver's title with a young Thomas Enge. The driver actually initially did get crowned as the driver's champion in the series, but a later drug test actually disqualified him and handed the championship to Sebastian Vettel. Horner bounces back though in 2003, recruiting Bjorn Windheim, who dominates and wins the F3000 title by a large margin, and Arden also take the team championship. So Arden in 2004, now based in Banbury, fields Red Bull-backed talent Vit Antonio Liuzzi, managed by a young Helmut Marko, who never took his eye off the ball, and wins 8 out of 10 races, clinching both the 2004 F3000 drivers title with Liuzzi and another team championship en route. By the age of just 30, Horner had established Arden as the top racing team in the feeder series. But he didn't want to stop there. So he began exploring opportunities in Formula One, even discussing a potential takeover of one of my favorite legendary teams of all time, Eddie Jordan's F1 team, Jordan F1, but backs off due to costs and, I'd imagine, Eddie's stiff negotiating power. Fate intervenes though when Red Bull, the energy drinks company, decided to buy out a team. You see, Red Bull had been eyeing up getting into Formula One, as Dietrich Mateschitz had a deep interest in Formula One and had sponsored drivers back in the 90s. He had brought a young Austrian on side in Helmut Marko, and Helmut Marko had actually sent, I believe, a car trailer to Britain after Horner bought it with his father years earlier from the Austrian, and they weren't actually really sure whether it was going to show up. Helmut had obviously been watching Horner on track and was able to kind of wrangle the idea of getting Horner on board. So the two of them went hand in hand, and Dietrich seemed to get on board. And therefore, as the team rebranded in 2004, the end of 2004 to early 2005, I believe, to Red Bull from Jaguar, which was originally, for anyone interested, Stewart Racing, which Ford bought as far as I remember. So in January 2005, Christian Horner is appointed team principal of the newly formed Red Bull Racing Formula One team, just weeks before the season opener. At 31 years of age, he becomes the youngest team principal in F1 history. Despite limited prep time, Horner leads Red Bull Racing to a surprisingly strong debut. Veteran driver David Coulthard finishes 4th at the Australian Grand Prix, and the team scores a respectable rookie season of 34 points in 2005. And to put that in perspective, the drinks company scored 35 points in 2005. In 2004, the Ford-backed Jaguar team managed to score 9. So it's a huge step up. Horner proves adept at talent spotting and deal making, and in late 2005, Horner manages to pull off the impossible, stealing Adrian Newey from McLaren to the Red Bull Energy Drinks Company, a technical wunderkind who had already won championships for McLaren and Williams going back and had done absolute magic at late. According to Newey himself, this was pulled off by Horner randomly bumping into him throughout the paddock, showing him around the Red Bull facility and so on. Helmut then coming in to add a little bit of legitimacy, as Helmut had been around the paddock for quite a while by this point. And then the final edge was pushed over as the enormous cost of signing Newey, I believe 10 million a year at that point, was a little bit daunting for Dietrich Mateschitz, who had the money but thought it was a lot of money to spend on one technical head. But thankfully, David Coulthard, who had experience with Newey before, managed to convince Dietrich that this was a solid investment. So between the three of them, the tag team happened and the dream team at Red Bull began. Newey became chief technical officer, and this coup laid the groundwork for future success. The team, though, did go through some growing pains. In 2006, they did transition to Ferrari engines, and Newey's influence started to slowly take effect. But reliability is really poor. But the team achieved its first podium in Monaco, and the future looked bright. In a now famous celebrity stunt, Horner honours a bet by jumping into the team's energy station swimming pool wearing nothing but a Superman cape after that podium. This added to the vibe at Red Bull. You got to keep in mind that at the time that they entered in 2005, it was an old white man's club of manufacturers and car makers, essentially, backed by BMW, Mercedes, Honda, Toyota, and all of these big corporate firms looking at this young company which sold cans of fizzy drink, having huge parties and jumping naked into the pool in Monaco. It was the kind of thing that went on behind the scenes in Formula One, but was very much not forced into the public eye. So Red Bull became a fan favourite due to these kind of things. 2007, though, marked the start of a turnaround for the team. It was the first from-scratch Newey-designed Red Bull car, and they also signed an Aussie Mark Webber. Performance is mixed. There was flashes of speed marred by 14 retirements over the season, and the team only finished 5th in the Constructors. But they could sense that things were starting to turn. In 2008, Red Bull continues to hover in the midfield. However, Horner and Red Bull's driver development guru Helmut Marko prepares for the future by grooming young talent. And this was starting to pay off with a 21-year-old German named Sebastian Vettel, who won a Grand Prix that year in the Italian Grand Prix in the second team that Red Bull had bought from Minardi, Toro Rosso, which was still Ferrari powered, and the old last year's chassis from Adrian Newey himself in 2008. And we covered all of that last week. I'll put it in the description below. All again, though, showing that the ingredients were there. But thankfully for them, there was a big technical regulation coming in 2009, and that was a focal point of the team. You see, sure, Toro Rosso had taken some extra gains, had actually beaten them to a win. Sure, they had all of these retirements and so on. Things weren't looking great, but they knew that a big change was around the corner and that was their time to strike amongst all of the enemies. They had the best man for the job in Newey. And Horner buckled down, continued to pay off by just focusing on making sure that all of the talent was in place and that the factory was in lockstep behind him, giving everyone what they needed, which was his strength. And this hard work paid off. Not fully, but it paid off in 2009. With Sebastian Vettel now in the team alongside Webber, Red Bull Racing scores its maiden victory at the 2009 Chinese Grand Prix and quickly begins to add more. Horner's team wins 6 of the 17 races that year, emerging as the closest challenger to the Brawn team, which we will cover in story time. And I think we've done a video on before here anyway, but that's a different story. But Red Bull finishes behind them, just not noticing one of the key elements that Brawn did essentially to win the Constructors. And they finished second in the Constructors Red Bull that year. This established a team that was a top player. All those other manufacturers who had been laughing at Red Bull quickly and ceremoniously shut the fuck up. Horner's decision to hire Vettel and his faith in Newey's genius are vindicated, as this RB5 shows just what this team can do and just how quickly it may be able to get to the top. This breakout year, as you can imagine, sets the stage for championship glory, and Horner is still only 35 years of age. but now is widely credited as the architect of future success in Formula One. He's no longer laughed at, he's now being watched. And Horner's management style was also starting to be unraveled by others around him as this kind of mix of discipline and playful enthusiasm. For example, he would organize cricket and soccer matches after the races with the team in order to make sure that all of the engineers, the designers, the track engineers and so on were all kind of mingling together and sharing ideas and becoming friends on and off the track. Just 5 years after its founding, though, the unspeakable would happen. Red Bull Racing reaches the pinnacle. In 2010, Horner leads the team to its first Constructors' Championship. Clinched with just one race to spare, and in a nail-biting drivers' finale at Abu Dhabi, Sebastian Vettel snatches the 2010 World Drivers' Championship in the last race in Abu Dhabi, becoming the youngest champion ever. At 36, Horner becomes one of the youngest team principals in history to win a championship. The only person I believe who is younger than him was Colin Chapman, but I'm sure someone will fact check me on that in the comments. The season wasn't without drama. There was inter-team tensions as Vettel and Webber battled fiercely, but Horner managed to keep the lid on all these conflicts with his calm yet firm handling of a late season collision between the two drivers, and he begins getting praise from basically the entire paddock. They were now double champions and ready to earn more. Under Horner's stewardship, Red Bull Racing dominates Formula One for 3 more years. The team secures the 2011, 2012 and 2013 Constructors' Championship and the same in the Drivers' Championship, meaning they were both 4-time consecutive driver and Constructors' Champions. This was just unthinkable when the team came in. Like, if you were watching back in 2004, which is when I kind of properly started watching, you probably are aware just how ridiculous this seemed. Just no one thought that this would be the outcome of this small little team getting in and building up this way. During this era, Horner's partnership with Adrian Newey produces cars that are both innovative and class-leading, and Vettel breaks numerous records, youngest double, triple and quadruple world champion. Horner often credits the entire team and emphasizes a one-team ethos, but he isn't afraid to make tough calls. For example, occasionally imposing team orders to maximize points, which causes some cracks to appear in 2013 with the infamous multi-21 situation. And like I said, if you want a deep dive into these 4 years, and specifically from Sebastian Vettel's side, please do check out the other video, the last video of Car Heroes. A fun fact about this is that just days after that multi-21 incident, Christian Horner was having a lunch at Buckingham Palace and was asked about the incident by Queen Elizabeth II, who was curious and bemused as he went and explained the entire situation to her, something that Horner has laughed about later on in life. Despite such incidents, though, Horner navigated all of these rivalries, and the team, by the end of 2013, were just on the top of the world. But unfortunately for one of the drivers, Mark Webber, he decided time was up for him and it was time to retire without a single championship to his name, although he was a brilliant racing driver, to be fair, and is now managing Oscar Piastri, who is leading this championship. Horner was recognised with an OBE from the Queen for his services to motorsport that year. His personal life, though, was taking a little bit of a different turn from the ongoing on-track success. After 14 years together, Christian and Beverly, his longtime girlfriend since 1999, part ways shortly after she gave birth to their daughter in October of 2013. And it's a difficult period for Horner personally. Friends note he juggled the pressure of a newborn at home while he had the stress of leading a championship campaign. And they officially separate by the end of 2013. So this garners some tabloid attention, as you can imagine, given Horner's rising fame at the time. 2014 was a completely different season for this now on top of the world Red Bull team, and a slap in the face by reality. The new V6 turbo hybrid era brings Red Bull back to earth. Mercedes leapfrogs to dominance, and Horner's team, hampered by an underpowered and very unreliable Renault engine, can only watch as their championship streak ends. Daniel Ricciardo, who was promoted to Webber's place, shines with 3 Grand Prix wins, but the wunderkind Sebastian Vettel gets none. he is absolutely dominated by this young kid, Ricciardo. In a shock move that underscores that this was the end of an era for Red Bull, in many ways could feel like what it is right now if Max does go to Mercedes, which is kind of the big rumor at the time of recording. If you're watching this a year from now, this was a big move, which is similar. And I talked about this last week, how, there's a lot of similarities between the Vettel era and the Verstappen era. But yeah, Vettel decided to leave the Red Bull team and end the era at the end of 2014 to go to 2015. Horner faces this turbulent season by publicly defending his team and criticizing engine partner Renault's shortcomings, and tensions run high between the two companies, as you can imagine, as this kicks off a very big and obvious and public 2-year spat. Internally, though, Horner is doing his utmost to do what he does best, to keep the team motivated in times of struggle and keep the top engineers and top people around for as long as possible to ensure that they can, recoup this former fame once again. He also begins considering alternative engine suppliers as frustrations with Renault, and these continuing false promises begin to mount as early as 2014. 2015 proves to be one of the most trying years for Horner's career. Red Bull endures a winless season, mainly thanks to the Renault power unit, as the aero designed by Newey & Co. was pretty good, to be fair. And Horner doesn't hide his vexation in this whatsoever. He labels the situation frustrating and at one point describes Renault reliability as dire, openly voicing his discontent in the media. And this got to a pretty high point. Like this, again, if you weren't watching at the time, you may not realize how similar a situation this feels at the moment, because although it was far less likely that Horner would ever be gone, at this point, because they were building a good chassis, they were doing everything they could, but they were so hamstrung by the engine. Dietrich Mateschitz, the billionaire owner of Red Bull, actually during that year publicly did threaten, well, as public as Dietrich got by quotes and so on in the paper, threaten to pull Red Bull out of F1 entirely if Renault didn't build them a competitive engine or if the engine issue wasn't sorted. So this was, a lot of pressure for the team, and Horner and his crew of lieutenants scrambled as quickly as they could. They unsuccessfully court Mercedes, as you can imagine, for engines. They tried to get to Ferrari, who also refused. And they even flirted with the idea of Audi entering F1 to build them engines, which didn't happen. But can you imagine, given where we are now? In the end, Horner negotiates an 11th hour compromise to keep the team on the grid. Red Bull re-sign with Renault for 2016, but under a non-branded guide of Tag Heuer engines, just like the Tag Porsche engines of the 90s with McLaren. And this deal allows them to kind of save face. It doesn't give them an immediate uptick in performance. It doesn't give them a new engine supplier, but it means that they can take more control, mount more pressure on Red Bull, and at least publicly look like they're doing something. The face-saving deal allows Red Bull to stay in F1 while they plan a longer-term solution. But during this turmoil, Horner's resolve never wavers. He is just cocksure that this is going to happen. Cocksure, probably not the best use of language for discussing Horner and things, turmoil. Doesn't matter. Let's move on. He consequently praises his chassis team and drivers, and by late 2015, he mends fences enough with Renault to hint at improved cooperation going forward. Despite his on-track situation going off-track, his off-track situation was back on track, as that year his engagement was announced to former Spice Girl Geri Halliwell. In May 2015, the couple tied the knot in Bedfordshire, and the high-profile marriage makes headlines in both F1 and entertainment media, and unconfirmed reports suggest Horner's parents initially refused to attend the wedding, allegedly upset at how abruptly things had ended with Beverly Allen, but later managed to repair this rift between them and they attended the wedding. And Geri, known as Ginger Spice, started to become a mainstay of the Formula One paddock as she attended races. In 2016, Horner and Helmut's Midas touch with young talent strikes again. After the first 4 races of 2016, a bold and very controversial at the time mid-season swap happens. Horner and Helmut Marko demote a young driver, Danny Kvyat, and also put his girlfriend into a waiting period on gardening leave for a new boyfriend as they promote Max Verstappen from Toro Rosso. This is a risky move, but something that they needed to do to keep him around and get away the vulture of Toto Wolff circling, which he still kind of was, I guess, at that point. Not really, but I'm kind of joking, but it is kind of funny how it ties back in. Like, Toto wanted to sign him. They got him into Toro Rosso because Toto couldn't give him a seat, etc., etc. Anyway, the move pays instant dividends because in the very first race for Red Bull, Max Verstappen is gifted the win. Yes, I said it to piss off a lot of Verstappen fans, by a colliding pair of Rosberg and Hamilton in the Mercedes in front of them, and the driver who had put himself into a brilliant third place managed to hold off the likes of Raikkonen and Vettel behind him to gather up everything he needed to become the youngest Formula One race winner in history. This stunning debut vindicated Horner's faith in Helmut's decision-making and set up Verstappen as F1's next superstar, their final replacement for Vettel. The team on the whole feels like they're having some sort of resurgence in 2016. They win 2 races, one for Verstappen and one for Ricciardo, and re-establish themselves as a top 3 contender on the grid. Horner's risk-taking with drivers and the way they go racing is widely praised at this point and seen as a breath of fresh air in Formula One as it becomes more and more popular. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, Horner is looking at ways to solve this puzzle of problems that they have once and for all. 2017 is competitive for Red Bull. Though still a step behind Mercedes and Ferrari, Horner's squad picks up 3 wins and finishes 3rd in the championship. And a notable development is Renault's improvement. Relations between Horner and Renault thaw slightly as engine performance gets temporarily better, but it's clear to Horner that to win in the title again, a bigger change might be needed. Throughout 2017, he evaluates the progress of a new partner, Honda, who is at this point in bed with McLaren and struggling massively, and therefore a lot of other teams just weren't interested in the Honda engine, but Horner saw something in it. This is where having 2 teams under the Red Bull banner becomes useful, because Horner is able to get Honda into the Toro Rosso team as kind of a trial for the 2018 season. Horner plays a key role in these strategic discussions, and he's also a more notably public figure, especially as a new Netflix series, Drive to Survive, is dropped. Publications even noticed that in the series, his off-track quips about drivers and other bosses with his wife, Jerry, makes him one of the stars, even though I think we all agree Ricciardo is who made it, but he was definitely up there. As we jump into 2018, we see it as a transitional yet pivotal year for Red Bull. They're still powered by Renault. They win 4 races thanks to Verstappen-Ricciardo's duo, and remain a top 3 team. But Horner makes a watershed decision in June. Red Bull announces it will be leaving its partnership with Renault for the 2019 season and switching to Honda after seeing a lot more of what they needed to in the partnership with Toro Rosso. This ended a 12-year alliance where, at one point in its history, Red Bull was essentially a Renault Works team. Like, in 2011, it was basically a Renault Works team in everything but name. Horner says it's a pretty clear-cut decision from everything he's seen, from the data he's seen, from the working relationship, and he dives in. The move is a massive gamble, as I said, though, because Honda's recent history doesn't make it look good. Think about this. They were just in bed with McLaren. McLaren are talking about moving away from Honda, and they do. They go back to Renault before going to Mercedes, but everything would tell you teaming with Honda was a bad idea. But Horner looked past that and saw it as the way to go. And as you probably know, it paid off. The announcement shocks many, but Horner is also dealt a slap in the face during this, as Renault, as I guess a form of payback, but also just trying to strengthen their lineup, decides to steal something out from under Horner as they sign Ricciardo to the Renault Works team for 2019. The announcement shocks many, including Horner, who famously quips during Netflix filming that he suspects Ricciardo might be running from a fight, indicating that Verstappen might be beating him, and that's probably why he's leaving, which was a fair cop at the time. But Ricciardo was brilliant, and if you think we should cover Ricciardo, let me know. For 2019, to fill Ricciardo's seat, they promote the young Pierre Gasly alongside the Dutchman Verstappen, and Horner's bold engine gamble begins to bear fruit. In 2019, Red Bull Racing, now with Honda Power, wins 3 races, including Honda's first F1 victory in over a decade, and notably closes the performance gap to Mercedes and Ferrari, with Max Verstappen delivering standout drives, finishing 3rd in the driver's standing. While the engine and the chassis still isn't good enough to really mount a title charge, it's clearly a step in the right direction, and Horner is quick to praise not only Honda's reliability and performance, but their willingness to take criticism under the chin and really fight hard to bring a better engine. This vindicates his decision to move away from Renault, which was, as I said, very, very risky at the time. The team's renewed competitiveness with what is now a works engine partner sets the stage for an even bigger driver title push. Off the track, Horner is rising to fame even more thanks to Drive to Survive and his charisma and humor, as well as his and his, well, soon, makes him a fan favorite. There is also, if I remember correctly, I think one of his horses was called Bottas, and he quips that he's not riding Bottas to Jerry, but I can't remember exactly. Of course, the very next year, as Red Bull pop up to hopefully mount a title charge, COVID-19 kicks in. It escapes from a bat or a factory or something, or a lab in Wuhan, who knows, to kick off a huge pandemic. And this gives Horner one of his most unique challenges to date, guiding an F1 team through a shortened, socially distant season of only 17 races, which was 17 races, right? If I believe correctly. And it's crazy how that's a shortened season, given that when I was watching first, was it 16 races was a full season? I believe it was. I know it went to 19 shortly after, but I think in 2004 it was 16 races. I know it was in the 2000 or in the 90s. I remember watching a few races in the 90s, but yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Correct me there. Maybe it's 19. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, he helps Red Bull. He helps implement Red Bull's strict health protocols and manages logistical hurdles on this revised calendar. On track, Mercedes still has the upper hand, but Red Bull solidifies its status as best of the rest, especially as Ferrari, who allegedly cheated and paid a massive fine for that alleged cheating, although it's sealed, so therefore it's alleged, fell way down the order and finished 6th in the Constructors. This made them finish 2nd in the Constructors' Championship, with Max winning 2 races and pushing hard. This marks the first season, though, of Red Bull's really, really cursed second seat. They had kind of had this issue in the past, but this was the first one. And it got so bad that halfway through the season, Pierre Gasly was demoted back to the Toro Rosso team. And a young Alex Albon, the Thai Brit driver, was promoted up to take on this enormous challenge. Sorry, I got that wrong. My notes are wrong here. Alex Albon was promoted at the mid of 2019, so this was his second season in 2020. My bad. Notes are wrong here. As I said, when you research on the interwebs, there's bound to be problems. So quick in-recording correction there. By the end of that year, though, he decided that after a season and a half, Alex Albon was never going to be able to tame Red Bull's ridiculously front-end loaded, sensitive, have to understand what the rear is doing at all times car, and decides to mount the man with the most rear end, the tire whisperer himself, and my favorite driver at the time, El Perez, Sergio from Mexico at the end of 2021, which I absolutely loved. It's a pragmatic move by Horner to strengthen the squad for a title fight to come, and it sets the stage for what will be one of the most exciting seasons to come in Formula One history. Of course, 2012 is still more exciting, but that's just a personal opinion. In 2021, Horner finds himself in a titanic title fight, the likes of which F1 hadn't seen in years. Red Bull finally had a car that Newey and Fallows and Vacher had put together, along with an engine that Honda had finally gotten to where it needed to be to take on Mercedes. And thankfully for them, they had a driver who now had not only the prodigious speed and aggression, but also the experience in Verstappen to take on the might of Hamilton, Mercedes, and Toto Wolff. The season is a roller coaster, as you would imagine, and I'm happy to maybe cover this in a different episode, maybe over the summer break later on. So if you've got questions on that, please do let me know. And Horner and Toto spar notoriously in the media, exchanging barbs and mind games that dominate headlines throughout the year. The rivalry even results in Horner getting an FIA official warning at the Qatar GP after he impetuously refers to a rogue marshal when Verstappen was penalised, an outburst for which he apologises and also has to attend FIA stewardship training. The tension culminates in an absolutely normal, with absolutely no controversy, of an Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in which Verstappen wins at the end. And we're not getting into that argument because that's not what this video is about. But Verstappen won, and it's not Red Bull or Verstappen's fault. Whatever happens, doesn't matter. That's the least you can say about it. Red Bull misses out on the constructors, though, as Verstappen wins his first driver's title and Mercedes take the constructors. But Horner is ecstatic to bring the Red Bull driver's crown back to the Red Bull team, its first since 2013. He praises Verstappen's relentless drive and calls 2021 one of the most hard-fought championships ever. The season, while rewarding, takes a toll on Horner, though. Horner later admits the intensity of the Hamilton duel and constant scrutiny, exacerbated by Netflix rolling cameras, made it a year he was happy to survive. Nevertheless, his stock as a top-tier team principal is high as ever after dethroning the Mercedes driver. And it wouldn't stop there. In 2022, there was an entirely new regulation change, one of the biggest regulation change in 40 years, even though technically going to have a bigger one next year. But Red Bull ascends to a new peak in 2022. Horner's team with Verstappen and Perez absolutely dominates the season. In fairness, they only dominated the second half as Ferrari did what Ferrari does, which is bring an incredibly fast and capable car for the first half of the season before throwing it all away because they're Ferrari, before firing a team principal as quickly as possible afterwards, which is probably where Red Bull is going in the future for anyone who thinks the Horner decision was a good idea. Red Bull clinches the Constructors' Championship and Verstappen easily secures at the end of the year after, like I said, a relatively good title fight where Leclerc got to show how good he was at the start of the season and gets his second straight driver's title with a record 15 Grand Prix wins. In fact, 2022 is among the most dominant years in F1 history, and Horner squad wins 17 of the 22 races, and Verstappen sets a new single-season win record. It appears that Horner has engineered the perfect blend of team at this point, a marketing spectacle with brilliant drivers, great engineers, and is setting his sight on an even bigger goal as Red Bull announced that they are going to build engines for the first time after, during the pandemic, Honda announces that they're going to leave, and go away. So Red Bull start to build their own powertrains for 2026. We're yet to see the fruit of that, and Horner actually himself won't get to see the fruit of that. He's not dead. He's just not part of the team anymore. But this was a strategic move for independence after Honda said they were leaving. Horner did not want to be at the mercy of another engine supplier that he didn't trust. So it made real sense at the time. There was some controversy, though. In October of 2022, the FIA revealed that Red Bull had exceeded the 2021 budget cap by a minor amount. It was, I believe, if I remember correctly, because this is a long time ago now, I believe it was 1.5 million, 1.7 million. But if you account for the tax credit that they had, which would have been accounted for anyway, if it wasn't for just the accounts, it's just an accounting error, it was around 400,000. So it fit under that minor one. And because it was the first season where they really implemented this, and because it actually says they can't strip someone of a constructors for the first one on a minor infraction under the regulations, Red Bull got a 5%, a 10% wind tunnel deficiency and a $7 million fine, which was, relative to what they could give under the regulations. And if you go read the financial cash cap, a decent one to give. But as you can imagine, rival teams were not quite happy about this, and they obviously wanted them banned, especially given it was such a tight championship in 2021. But it's water under the Abu Dhabi safety car bridge. In a heated press conference, he calls the accusations shocking and defamatory, asserting that Red Bull gained zero benefit from the overspend in 2021 and that the breach was due to an accounting technicality over some catering and shrimp costs. And he even reveals that the public mudslinging led to some of his employees' children being bullied at school, blasting one rival, who is still a big rival right now, McLaren's Zach Brown, for labeling the team cheats. Eventually, Red Bull accepts an FIA penalty and they get fined. October 2022, though, also brought personal and big change to Red Bull, which would have lasting effects, as we've seen in recent weeks, as the owner and co-founder of Red Bull overall, Dietrich Mateschitz, passed away at the age of 78, just before the Austin Grand Prix weekend. Mateschitz had been a staunch supporter of Horner and a patriarchal figure for the team. After his passing, a new management structure at Red Bull, led by Oliver Mintzlaff on the corporate side, and Mateschitz' son and the Udavija family, start to take a more active role in the company, which would lead to some turmoil quickly down the line. The shift quietly seeds internal tensions, as Horner now has to answer to a different chain of command. Still, for Horner, the year ends on a high note as he's given a CBE for his contributions to motorsport. 2023, though, they would build on the momentum of 2022, with Horner leading Red Bull to a stunning season of success. The team wins an unprecedented 21 out of 22 races, including a streak of 10 wins in a row by Max Verstappen, making 2023 arguably the most dominant season in Formula One history. The only thing that comes even slightly close is 1988, as this absolutely demolishes the likes of 2002 and 2004 for Schumacher and Ferrari. Max Verstappen clinches the Drivers' Championship with relative ease, often cruising to victory, as Red Bull grasps on its sixth Constructors' Championship. Sergio Perez even finishes runner-up, making Red Bull's first 1-2 in history, and on the surface, all is well. But behind closed doors, Horner navigates this growing internal challenge. The Red Bull company wasn't happy either, given that Porsche wanted to come in and really kind of co-own the team and get a lot of the risk off of the Red Bull GmbH family, which Horner and Helmut at the time and even Newey pushed back on, and Horner shot the deal down, which Mintzlaff really wasn't happy about, and neither was Mateschitz' son. So behind the scenes, this new corporate, cost-focused, cost-conscious, hands-on approach is starting to tug against the all-conquering control that Horner wants at Milton Keynes. And even Helmut Marko, Red Bull statue, who hasn't done anything in a decade, was starting to clash with Horner. Reportedly starts to side more with Jos Verstappen than Christian Horner, and this all starts to trickle off in the background to kick off something that would happen shortly. Foreshadowing. As one insider put it, the political rift that followed Matteschitz's death in 2022 only deepened in 2023, and the stage is set for a tumultuous period despite some on-track trophies. The new year brings a storm Horner didn't anticipate. On February 5th, 2004, news broke that Horner is under internal investigation by Red Bull after a female employee accused him of inappropriate behavior, including alleged sexual harassment and coercive and controlling conduct. Red Bull GmbH, keen to show seriousness, appoints an external lawyer to investigate, and Horner is temporarily under a cloud while the season preparations are underway. The specifics of the allegation obviously don't get divulged. The report remains confidential, but the press get wind of it. And on February 28, 2024, Red Bull announces that Horner has been cleared of all wrongdoing and will keep his position. Horner expresses relief, but celebrations are short-lived. The very next day, an anonymous email is sent to F1 Media containing a trove of alleged WhatsApp messages between Horner and the accuser, including one that has a picture of what is allegedly a gentleman sausage, but looks interestingly like a finger. And if your gentleman sausage looks like a finger, you should seek medical help very, very soon. Interestingly, then there's all of this sort of allegations coming out that the only person who could have sent those emails was a young Verstappen's father, but this just turned the whole thing into a massive telenovela. Though Horner continues his role, the leaked material fuels gossip and casts a lingering shadow. The situation is compounded by a bombshell from Jos Verstappen. On March 4th, 2024, Max's father gives a scathing interview to the Daily Mail, openly calling for Horner's ouster. Jos claims there is tension while Horner remains in position and warns the team is in danger of being torn apart and it can't go on the way it is. It will explode. And a lot of people now say, well, Horner called it, but I say it's really easy to say that the house is going to burn down if you're the one pouring gasoline on the flames. So I think, look, I've expressed my personal opinion in other videos. I think Jos and Max gained nothing from being vocal here. They only could lose from this. There was no upside. But hey, people with Dutch flags in their profiles like to argue, and the comment section is at your disposal. This very public vote of no confidence is unprecedented from a driver and his father, and essentially the father of the team star is attacking the team boss in the press. The comments are widely seen as reflecting the sentiments of Helmut Marko and perhaps, but less reported on, Max himself, who personally I don't think is the case. I think Max just has been led well by his team before and therefore has confidence in them, and as Bill Gates said, it's easy for wealthy people or, successful people to fail because they think they can never lose. So it's easy to negotiate with them. But anyway, Horner is reportedly furious and deeply hurt by Jos's remarks, but in public, he tries to downplay it, stating that his focus is on the team and suggesting that external noise won't distract Red Bull. Nonetheless, the damage is done, and Horner does a full-on Bill Clinton, which is to focus heavily on the economy and to stay out of the public eye for once in his career, which he did. He doubled down, focused on Milton Keynes, and stayed out of the spotlight, and all of the noise kind of happened around him. Despite the off-track drama, Horner manages to keep the team performing at a high level for most of 2024. Max Verstappen, though perhaps less dominant than previous years, secures the 2024 Drivers' Championship in a very interesting season, his fourth straight in a row. However, Red Bull's stranglehold on the Constructors' title slips, and McLaren managed to win with Ferrari in second place. But a bigger hit to the team was that earlier in the season, in March, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it was May, among all of this noise and all this political turmoil behind the scenes, Adrian Newey decides to step down from Red Bull Racing after leading the team's technical division since 2006, technically speaking. This is a huge blow to the team, but Horner tries to stay as a strong face to the Milton Keynes team, as in fairness, the day-to-day running has been done by the likes of Vache and Balbo since the 2018 season for the most part. However, this blow could not be understated, especially given that when you have problems and you're trying to fix them quickly, a guy like Newey is the guy you want around, and it signals wider problems for the team. They had already lost Rob Marshall, who was a big name in the team, but kind of a less McLaren in 2023. And in the same year of 2024, Jonathan Wheatley went to go and lead the Audi, what would be the Audi team, what will be the Audi team for 2026. So this departure and these departures were seen as seismic moments, as Horner was losing his closest technical ally and his other allies of nearly 2 decades between them. And observers note that Horner looked emotional when thanking Newey publicly, calling him one of the greatest designers in F1 history and acknowledging the huge loss, while also talking about how they could continue without him. By the winter of 2024, the once rock-solid Horner, Marko, Verstappen axis was completely fractured. Newey's gone, Marko and Jos are on one side, Horner is increasingly isolated and fully focusing on just holding on to Milton Keynes. And going into 2025, Horner publicly insists that Red Bull can bounce back. The 2025 season, the year that this is being recorded in, if you're watching this in the future, starts with Red Bull on the back foot for the first time in years. A new technical regulation tweak and the loss of Newey contributes to a subpar car. trying to catch up McLaren along with Newey going and Rob not being there and Jonathan Wheatley and I'm sure lots of other unnamed people not there really put them on the back foot and came out with a subpar yet on average second fastest car, to be fair, for much of the first half of this season so far. Red Bull is not the class of the field. McLaren duo Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris come out strong, and by the mid-season, Verstappen has found himself only third in the championship, trailing both drivers. This on-track struggle only fuels the internal political issues going on. Verstappen's long-term contract, which is signed until 2028, famously contains performance exit clauses, which I'm not going to get into for this video, and rumors begin to swirl that Mercedes boss Toto Wolff is eager to sign the young Dutchman. The Red Bull slump continues, and Red Bull's upper management, including and led by Oliver Mintzlaff, backed by Helmut Marko and allegedly Jos Verstappen, start to be less enamored with Horner and are very much nowhere near as enamored as Dietrich was. The corporate side and Marko see an opening to make a change off the back of this performance. And during the Austrian Grand Prix weekend in late June and the British Grand Prix weekend in early July, a series of high-level meetings take place. It's reported that one meeting at Spielberg between Max Verstappen and his father, It's reported that in one meeting at Spielberg, Max Verstappen himself, along with Jos Verstappen, sat down with Mintzlaff and likely Marko, where Verstappen's future and team direction were discussed frankly. After this meeting, and although all of the details are still held, behind closed doors, they're scarce, they're reported, after this meeting, the quick decision was made to remove Christian Horner from the team. In a stunning and somber announcement that reverberated around the F1 world, on July 9, 2025, Christian Horner is fired as team principal from Red Bull Racing immediately after the British Grand Prix. Red Bull confirms the news with a tense statement, ending Horner's 20-year reign at the team he built. The decision is abrupt, with even Horner himself saying publicly at least that he's not quite sure why it happened. We know he's also texted friends and co-workers that he still doesn't understand why he's gone. The Red Bull board immediately hand day-to-day operations over to Laurent Mekies, who Horner had appointed to run, ironically, the sister team at AlphaTauri. And this marks the end of the story thus far. We don't know how it will go from here. All we really do know is that it's likely not the end of Horner's time in Formula One. Where he'll end up is anyone's guess. But his influence on Formula One cannot be understated. In his 20-year run with Red Bull, he has become not only the youngest team principal, or one of the youngest team principals to win a championship, he has also become the second most successful team leader in Formula One history, bringing home 14 world championships between constructors and drivers, 124 Grand Prix victories, and developing some of not only the greatest sports cars in the world, but some of the greatest drivers as well. His blend of youthful bravado with cutthroat public appearances and willingness to just speak his mind has made him a fan favorite over the years, and it's given Netflix a villain to jump onto in the Toto versus Horner battle in 2021. A lot of people may think that Horner leaving Red Bull is no big deal and it's a corporate team that don't need him. But I think that's an understatement. I think it's likely that Red Bull will now face years of torment. But if you're Christian Horner, who is now sitting back and looking at a $50 to $60 million payout to be let go, I hope that for a moment you take a little bit of time to reflect on, while things didn't end great, you have achieved incredible things. And I think that we are very quick in this social media toxic environment to just take one part of someone's life and write off the rest. So I, for one, think it's time to applaud Christian Horner and look forward to what he can do going forward. And am I saying this just because I'm hoping he'll run Alpine and that Alpine will keep Colapinto long enough to give him a championship? Sure. But I'm also saying it because my favourite driver of all time was Vettel, and Horner gave him 4 championships. So this has been Car Heroes. I've been Jason Hassett, and I still am. We'll see you next week for story time. I'll probably interchange them, but don't forget to subscribe. And thank you for listening.